January 9, 1918, in a quiet fold of the Arizona border country called Bear Valley.
A patrol from Troop E, 10th Cavalry rides out from camp. Buffalo soldiers in blue wool and worn...
On a ridge above Bear Valley, two lookouts scan the empty expanse. Part of...
To the south and west, Yoeme fighters also move through this landscape. Men from Sonora carrying rifles. Between Can Ridge, neither side yet sees the other clearly.
In a moment, one shouted signal from this ridge will turn a routine sweep into the last recorded fight. To understand why men met with rifles in Bear Valley, we have to step back to the larger borderland. A country.
In the 1880s, Mexican forces intensified campaigns against the Yoeme, whose river valley, homeland, and
Yoeme communities lived along rivers and fields, growing crops and moving seasonally, even as armies and officials claimed authority over their lands. By the early 1900s, decrees and campaigns pushed many Yoeme from their homes, sending some to forced labor.
bands crossed into Arizona as laborers and fighters, carrying what they could and sometimes the rifles that linked them to the struggle still burning in Sonora.
On the Arizona side, some found wage work on ranches and rail lines, moving between worlds that rarely saw the...
Ranchers kept ledgers of stock and grazing claims, watching the same valleys with a different set of worries.
At Fort Huachuca, commanders translated those fears into patrol lines and observation posts, assigning the 10th Cavalry.
Orders of the day stress vigilance, the need to check trails and washes, to question strangers, and to bring in anyone found armed and moving in groups.
United States policy during the Great War also tightened control over arms moving toward Mexico, placing added weight on each patrol and search.
Bear Valley itself is a hard country of ridges and washes, a natural corridor where anyone moving between...
Yoeme fighters, those routes offered both risk and shelter, places to camp, cook, and clean weapons before moving again under cover of...
As winter deepened in early 1918, fresh reports of missing stock and armed riders filtered in from ranch.
Commanders in the field marked Bear Valley with fresh ink, a point on the map where reports and tracks seemed to converge.
By the time night fell, those separate camps were already moving toward each other, drawn by hunger.
The next morning begins like many before it. A lone lookout on the ridge, watching empty hills that almost never stay empty for long.
From the east, a courier pounds into camp with fresh reports from nearby ranches, the kind of news that tightens a commander's jaw.
The note speaks of missing cattle, tracks heading toward the hills, and men seen armed and moving in small groups. In a fold of ground not far away, Yoeme fighters study their own route north, weighing where to cross and how to avoid patrol.
They check rifles and cartridges with practiced hands, knowing that across this line, a weapon can mean survival.
By mid-morning, they are moving, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies and fresh hide taken from an...
When a trooper rides by, the rancher points toward Bear Valley and warns that the men who did this are moving deeper into the hills.
On the ridge, the first sign is not a figure, but a thin line of dust, drawn slowly across a distant slope like a warning.
Hello! Cal Select! The lookout calls the third alert with a single recorded later in a brief log. Enemy in sight! In an instant, the quiet of the morning breaks. Troopers rushing to tighten saddles, snatch rifles, and form up before...
The officer gives short, clear orders, pointing at ridge and canyon on a rough map, dividing men into elements that will climb, search, and cut off any escape.
Troop E leaves the safety of canvas and cook fires, riding toward the ridge where the dust trail thickens.
On the far side of that country, the Yoeme band climbs a low hill, one man pausing to scan their back trail as if feeling the weight of eyes on his shoulders. He sees what the lookout saw.
only pale smear of dust.
Their leader speaks quickly and gestures toward a canyon that cuts into the hills, a place of shadows and broken ground.
They split into smaller knots of men and slip toward the canyon mouth, hoping that broken terrain and confusion will blunt any force that follows. The cavalry tops the ridge, some troopers dismounting to move more quietly on foot, trading speed for the chance to see before they are seen.
Fresh tracks cut deep into the soil and a scrap of rawhide near the trail tell them they are not far behind the band they have been ordered to stop.
For a time, both lines move in parallel. Cavalry on the high ground. Yoeme and Millers. At the edge of the drop, the officer sends 2 sections down into the draw, while a third holds the ridge.
Inside the canyon, the Yoeme brace rifles over stone and crouch behind thorny brush, shaping the ground itself into their ally.
Down from the ridge, the first troopers begin to enter the canyon, backs lit by the sky as they step from
For a long heartbeat, there is only the sound of boots on loose stone and horses breathing above, and then the distance between. The first troopers step into the canyon, rifles down but loaded, eyes straining to read stone and shadow before either can turn into an enemy.
Behind a rock, a Yoeme fighter lines up his first shot, not for glory, but to buy enough time for his band to escape the trap they now recognize.
The first volley rips through dust and rock, warning and intent in the same instant, forcing the cavalry to ground.
Get down! Positions on the left flank! Cover fire now!
From above, the officer hears the echoing shots and signals restraint, knowing that a canyon can swallow a unit that rushes its own fear.
The Yoeme fight the ground as much as the men before them, using every boulder and thorn patch to fire and vanish before a clean line can form against them. For a moment, the advantage lies with the men who chose the ground. Stone splinters near a trooper's shoulder as he presses flatter into the dust.
2 troopers begin to edge along the canyon wall, searching for a flank that might peel away the cover the Yoeme have built from rock and distance.
Fall back! Deeper into the canyon!
Above, the ridge element moves to close the far mouth of the canyon, understanding that the fight below means little if the band can slip out and vanish into the next valley.
A Yoeme fighter goes down with a shot through the arm, his rifle skittering over stone as a comrade drags him backward out of the line of fire. The cavalry answer with measured shots, each man exposing himself only long enough to send a round where he saw a flash of movement a moment before. In truth, they are not far apart in distance, a short throw between rocks, but the canyon makes that short space.
We have to push forward, Sergeant. We can't lose them now.
It's too exposed. We hold this position until backup arrives.
A pack mule refuses to move under cracking shots, tethered to bundles that now feel heavier than any gain they might bring once this day ends.
The flanking pair finally win a perch above the line of rocks, their rounds slanting in from the side to deny the Yoeme the freedom to rise and shift.
Get down! They're above us on the ridge! Take cover!
For a moment, a scrap of cloth rises on a rifle barrel. Not yet surrender, but a test. A question about whether another way out remains.
¡Atención! Depongan las armas y salgan con vida. Se les ofrece clemencia.
The Yoeme leader listens, measuring words against the weight of wounded men and the way the canyon has closed behind him.
A younger fighter urges them to press on, his anger as sharp as the rock around them, unwilling to accept capture at the hands of soldiers under a foreign flag.
The wounded man says little. His labored breathing and the stain on his sleeve speak for him.
In the end, the leader chooses survival over a final stand, placing his rifle on the rock and rising with hands open to the sky.
Troopers hold their fire but not their tension, every finger still on a trigger, until more figures rise and the canyon shifts from combat to custody.
One by one, more men step out, adding their rifles and bandoliers to a small pile that marks the turning point in this short, hard fight.
The cavalry move in cautiously, searching for hidden weapons and binding wrists with simple rope, turning opponents into prisoners in a matter of minutes. The wounded,
The wounded are laid on makeshift stretchers. Pain meeting a rough kind of care as men who traded shots an hour ago.
An officer counts prisoners and gathers their weapons and small belongings, reducing complex lives to numbers and items listed in a field book.
The column turns back toward the valley, prisoners in the middle, troopers and a pack mule bearing the weight of seized weapons and gear.
When the last man leaves, the canyon keeps only brass and footprints. Silent proof of a fight that has already...
By midday, the fight has shrunk to a slow-moving column in the open valley. Troopers surrounding the men who stood against them an hour before.
The prisoners walk in single file, wrists bound but shoulders straight. Each step another measure of distance between.
On a rough stretcher, the wounded man rides between worlds, his arm bound with cloth, his future top.
Behind them, the canyon shrinks back into the folds of Bear Valley, soon to be just another cut in the land.
At camp, the work of war shifts to the work of custody. Horses cooled and watered, while the prisoners are...
A trooper passes cups of water along the line, the brief meeting of eyes between guard and guarded hinting at a
Numbers replace gunfire as the officer records the day's work. 1 man killed, 9 captured, weapons and cartridges counted into tidy lines of ink.
On the page, the fight becomes an entry, reduced to a few lines that will later teed into reports and histories that may or may not remember the names behind the numbers.
Yoeme, who fell in the canyon, is laid in thin soil. Later, the rancher rides in to hear what happened, his gaze sliding over the prisoners as he speaks of cattle and fences rather than causes or borders.
The officer points at seized rifles and packs as proof that armed men crossed his sector, fitting the day neatly into the patterns his superiors expect to see.
Those Yaquis were just as good fighting men as any Apache.
That night, 2 fires burn in the same camp. One for the guards and one for the guarded.
In official returns, the clash will be noted as a small success. An armed band broken, 1 man killed.
At first light, the small column forms again, this time pointed toward Arif. The march to town is long and quiet, the weight of ropes and exhaustion replacing the sharp fear that filled the canyon the day before. In Arivaca, an adobe room serves as a temporary jail, its barred windows.
Inside, they sit on blankets against cold walls, 1 man idly tracing the shape of a river in the dust.
In Nogales, the wounded man is carried into a small hospital, where his fate will be recorded in another book, in a different hand. A clerk in town prepares a short notice for local readers, reducing the Dale's exchange of fire to a paragraph of border news.
At Fort Huachuca, a senior officer reads the report from Bear Valley. His attention caught more by the clarity of the
On a map, the path from canyon to camp to Arivaca and Nogales looks clean and simple. A line of custom.
Back in Bear Valley, the wind erases tracks and the canyon sits in its old site.
When the report is folded and filed under the year 1918, the skirmish becomes part of the official record.
Morning in Arivaca begins with the scrape of a key in a lock. The Yoeme prisoners rising stiffly from blanket.
The report clearly states they are army personnel. They are subject to my command.
And the law states they are subject to local magistrates when in the township.
A clerk copies names and scant details into a ledger, leaving blanks where language barriers and hurried arrest. In Nogales, the wounded man lies in a narrow bed under white sheets, his life measured now by pulse.
When the doctor writes the last line on his chart, and the fight claims its final life, recorded in a single word.
The surviving prisoners are moved again, this time toward Nogales, each transfer another step deeper into systems that were never built with their lives in mind.
In Nogales, a fenced yard and guardhouse give custody a more formal shape, replacing the improvised cell of Ari.
We must consider military internment for these prisoners.
A trial sets that perhaps deportation is safer.
Months later, the yard holds other men and other cases. and the specific fates of the Yoeme from Bear Valley live only in thin files and distant memories.
The border does not still with one skirmish. Yoeme families and workers continue to move between Sonora and Arizona.
Through the 1920s and 30s, Yoeme men and women continue to work in fields, rail yards, and ranches.
At Fort Huachuca, an officer in a new uniform occasionally pulls an old file marked Bear Valley.
Today, Yoeme communities, including the Pascua Yaqui near Tucson, continue their own paths, balanced.
Language classes bring elders and children together, keeping Yoeme words alive.
Near Bear Valley, a simple marker now tells visitors that a fight took place here in 1918.
They came through that distant canyon, trying to imagine the troopers crossing this ground.
And the Yoeme moved across here. It seems so quiet now.
The canyon has not changed much. Stone holds the same ledges and shadows that once sheltered rifles. Even as when we place the 1918 column beside the valley as it looks now, we see not just an ending, but a point on a longer line.
In the end, the story of Bear Valley depends on how we read the thin pages that survived and the silences that surround them. Historians often call this the last battle between United States soldiers and native fighters, but a question mark belongs beside that neat label.
In Native Studies classrooms, the 1918 skirmish becomes a teaching point, a way to discuss how state borders
In Yoeme communities, elders tell stories less about a single canyon fight and more about years of crossing.
Seen together, the canyon in Arizona and the river valleys in Sonora remind us that the 1918 Clapton. The phrase "last Indian battle" etched in metal simplifies a history that did not end so cleanly for Yoeme. Official records capture 1 man killed and 9 captured. They do not capture the
things. In hearing rooms and council chambers, Yoeme representatives point back to histories like Bear Valley when they speak about land.
Ceremony and gathering show that Yoeme identity did not end in 1918. Songs, dances, and language.
When we look at Bear Valley now, the trail holds no uniforms and no rifle fire, only the memory that meant.
Elders, scholars, and teachers now share the work of remembering, weighing what official files say against.
The valley today looks much as it did in 1918, but we can choose to see more than empty land.
If Bear Valley is called a last stand, it should also be remembered as a reminder